in the industrial context, planned obsolescence is the mode through which industrial producers were able to ensure that there would be a continued market for whatever they were producing by making sure that what they were selling would wear out at some point, right? That it wouldn't quite have a permanent life, and that therefore if you bought a light bulb once, that wouldn't solve your light problems for the rest of your life. At some point you would have to buy another light bulb. So there would be a continued market there. In the academic universe, we seem to have relied on a set of scholarly forms, the book, the journal article, that should serve our purposes forever. Right? That should be the form that we need in order to convey the knowledge that we're producing for all time. And yet, as our technologies are changing, we find ourselves nonetheless needing new kinds of forms in order to communicate the knowledge that we're producing. So the planned obsolescence in academic publishing is slightly different from that in industrial production. I'm less gesturing toward the notion that you always need a new book because the last one is going to wear out, than that the form of the book as we have known it, isn't doing quite the same kind of work for us that it used to do. We publish books and they get checked into university libraries and they sit there on the shelves and they don't circulate in the ways that ideas in contemporary culture are able to circulate electronically. One of the great benefits of digital technologies as we have them implemented today, in scholarly communication in particular, is the ability not just to get a published text out into circulation very quickly, right? That you can put it on the web and it can instantaneously be interacted with by scholars all over the world, but also that interaction of those scholars with that text can be a two-way kind of interaction, right? That you can read the text that's published online and you can respond to it sometimes in the same space as that text. And so the scholarly publication turns into a venue for a kind of conversation between the scholar and the audience that's reading it. And that, I think, is one of the really crucial affordances of digital media, is the ability to transform the event of publishing from a one-way communication of ideas into a real exchange. There are several disadvantages that I don't know if I would think of them as disadvantages. First of all, I think I might think of them as hurdles or obstacles that we need to sort of get around, figure out how to get past. One of them is a sense that digital texts may be more ephemeral, right, than a printed text. You have the print book, you put it in the library, you can be relatively assured that that book, until the library begins deaccessioning books and sort of clearing out its stacks, that book will continue to exist. And we've had 500 years worth of practice in preserving the book, in ensuring that its paper doesn't degrade and that it's kept in good circumstances so that it doesn't crumble into dust. We don't have that same kind of practice in preserving digital texts yet. And so there's a sense in which it seems like those texts might disappear if we don't take a particular kind of care. Many libraries are currently working on means of preserving digital texts, but there's a lot of work that remains to be done there yet. So that is a concern about publishing digitally as opposed to in print. Another concern has to do with the relative disposability of the devices on which we read these texts, right? The book sort of carries its own device with it. You don't have to have a special device in order to read it. The iPad is a wonderful thing, and it can adapt to a whole lot of different kinds of texts. But of course, as you know, the iPad gets upgraded and updated every year. And so at some point, will older iPads still be able to interact with newer texts in the ways that we want them to be able to? It's unclear. There's also the question of what happens when the next new thing beyond the iPad, something we can't even imagine yet, gets developed. Will all of the texts that publishers have published for iPad be readable on this new device or not? So again, it's going to be really important for us to be thinking about the fluidity of digital texts and their ability to move not just through the devices that we have available to us now, but into the future as well. I think many scholars don't believe that digital publishing has the same value as publishing in print. We have very much a culture that is based around, the object of the book or the ways that journals and journal articles circulate, that we're very, very attached to those particular forms. We're not entirely convinced that we're going to get credit in the same way for publishing in digital form. And in fact, many institutions don't take it quite as seriously. They don't see that a digital publication has the same value, if not even a greater value, because of that interaction that digital work can promote. And so we have a lot of work to do sort of internally in helping scholars find ways to take digital publishing seriously, but also institutionally in creating the systems that will allow us to evaluate and appreciate the digital work just as much as we have print. Interesting. So I did, in 2009, publish the first draft of this book online for open review, because I spend so much time in the book talking about the future of peer review and the ways that we need to open it up that I thought, well, I have to do this. So working with my press, we developed a way to open up the peer review process to anyone who is interested. And one of the great things that came out of that was that I was able to get feedback from a much wider community of readers and of scholars than I would have been able to otherwise. The press sent the manuscript out in the conventional way for traditional peer review, and I got 2 excellent and very thorough reviews of the book from those reviewers. But they were 2, right? And there's only so much perspective that 2 people can bring to anything. I had over 40 readers of the book online, and they were from a very varied range of fields. There was an attorney, there were several librarians, there were scholars of all stripes. There were people who were just interested, and they all brought their own interests to bear. So Media Commons was originally founded by myself, my collaborator Avi Santo, and a group of folks that we were working with at the Institute for the Future of the Book as a means of really attempting to help scholars in media studies think about what it might mean for them to publish in forms and in venues other than in print. Being such a media-oriented field, obviously, scholars in media studies were still very much publishing only books and journal articles. It was very straightforward. And so we started thinking about, well, what might you be able to do if you could publish a brief video clip and a little bit of commentary on that clip and start a discussion about it? Having built a platform once isn't sufficient, right? You can't just simply sort of build it, launch it, and then let it do its thing. It has to have that constant support and upgrade and work being done on it in the background. So that has been a bit of a challenge. I would also say that there are still some folks out there who kind of look at the work that we do on Media Commons and who say, well, that's great, but that's a starting place. Now go write a journal article about that. And I'm okay with that, quite frankly. I think that the work that we're doing on Media Commons is very slowly beginning to be taken as real work in its own right. But if a scholar has an idea that sort of begins, I was going to say that begins as a blog post, but it might actually even begin as a tweet and then develop into a blog post. And then that develops into something that's longer and more formalized, like a journal article, so much the better.